So, when you hear about conflict breaking out in West Asia, what's the first thing that pops into your head? It's oil, right? Global energy markets, petrol prices at the pump. But what if I told you the single biggest threat to India's economy from all this isn't about what powers our cars? What if it's actually about the very materials that build our cities and feed our nation? Let's get into it. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start by looking beyond the usual headlines about oil and gas. Then we'll dive deep into the data and uncover India's hidden dependencies. From there, we'll trace the ripple effects across our key industries, get into the real energy squeeze, and finally, see what's being done to find some stability in this whole mess. Whenever there's tension in West Asia, our eyes immediately go to crude oil prices. It's almost a reflex. But the thing is, that's just scratching the surface. The real story, the one with massive implications for India's core industries, is happening on those exact same shipping routes, but it's a story we don't hear nearly enough about. So what is that biggest risk then? I mean, if it's not just about fuel, what should we really be worried about? Well, the answer has some serious consequences for India's domestic economy, and it's all about the supply chain for stuff we honestly just take for granted every single day. And this is the key takeaway right here. The real danger isn't just about oil tankers. It's about the disruption to a whole flow of critical industrial materials, stuff that has to pass through choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. We're talking about the absolute essential building blocks for our manufacturing, construction, and even our agricultural sectors. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's look at the numbers, because this is where you can really see the case for a much, much wider economic impact. This is where we see just how deeply India's industrial backbone is connected to what happens in West Asia. Okay, just look at this chart for sulfur. Almost 2/3, that's nearly 66% of India's entire supply, comes from this one region. Now, this isn't just some random chemical. It is the absolute foundation for sulfuric acid, which is vital for our country's huge fertilizer and chemical industries. No sulfur, big problems. And it doesn't stop with sulfur. Oh no, the dependency is deep and it's across the board. Just look at this table. Over half of our copper wire, which we need for our power grids, comes from West Asia. For limestone, a core ingredient for cement, that number shoots up to over 68%. It's the same story for gypsum, for DRI. These are all critical materials for steel and construction. And get this vulnerability even hits our major export industries. India, as you know, is a global powerhouse in diamond processing. Think Surat. But where do the raw materials come from? Well, over 40% of the rough, uncut diamonds that fuel this entire industry are imported from West Asia. So any disruption over there directly threatens one of our biggest export earners. So what does this all actually mean on the ground, right? How does a shipping problem in the Strait of Hormuz affect a construction site in Mumbai or a farmer in Punjab? Let's trace that chain reaction. Let's start with one of the absolute biggest engines of our economy, construction. We're talking about everything from new highways and metro lines to the homes and offices we live and work in. So remember that data we just saw, that heavy reliance on West Asia for limestone and gypsum? Well, those are non-negotiable ingredients for making cement. A supply disruption there means a pretty direct path to higher cement prices, which could delay major infrastructure projects and, you guessed it, make housing even more expensive for everyone. Okay, next up, let's talk about how we power our country and all our gadgets. I mean, the entire modern economy runs on electricity, and that electricity has to get from the power plant to your home somehow. That 50.7% dependency on copper wire, that is a serious vulnerability for our power grid. It's not just about maintaining the wires that are already there, it's also a key component for building out new renewable energy infrastructure. So this dependency actually puts our green energy goals at risk. So even while we're trying to look beyond oil, the volatility in energy prices creates its own unique, very serious challenge. And there is one industry where this energy squeeze is felt more sharply than anywhere else: steel manufacturing. You don't have to take my word for it. This quote from an industry insider really gets to the heart of the matter. They basically point out that, look, you might be able to find another country to buy limestone from, but you just can't escape the global energy market. And for steel, that is the real problem. And here's exactly why this is such a huge deal for steel. India makes steel in two main ways: The most common method uses coking coal, but the other route, called DRI, which many major players use, is completely dependent on natural gas. And since a huge chunk of our natural gas comes from West Asia, well, those steel producers are right on the front lines of any supply shock. So, faced with all these vulnerabilities in both raw materials and in energy, what are the options? I mean, what are industries actually doing to try and manage these risks and find some kind of stability? Well, it's kind of like a three-part strategy. First, companies are scrambling to find new suppliers, looking for limestone in Thailand and Vietnam, or maybe DRI from places like Libya or Malaysia. But the second problem, the much harder one, is energy. Finding new materials doesn't shield you from crazy global gas prices. And third, the impact isn't the same for everybody. The fertilizer industry, for instance, has a little bit of breathing room right now because it's their off-season. But if this crisis drags on, it could become a massive problem for the next planting season. All of this really shines a light on a critical vulnerability right at the heart of India's growth story. We've seen that our reliance on West Asia goes so much deeper than just fuel. It is woven into the very fabric of our construction, our power, and our manufacturing sectors. And while finding new suppliers might be a temporary fix, that exposure to volatile energy markets isn't going anywhere. It really forces us to ask a tough question. In a world this interconnected, how can an economy like ours ever truly be secure?